Cindy Monkman's encounter with the Apelt brothers became a fateful event in her life, which unfortunately led to a tragic end. On October 8, 1988, fate brought Cindy together with Michael and Rudi in one of the city's popular clubs. Tall, handsome, and charismatic, the Germans immediately caught the girl's attention. The 25-year-old Michael made an especially strong impression on her. Their acquaintance grew into an evening spent together, during which they couldn't take their eyes off each other. Katie, Cindy's younger sister, became an unwitting witness to the beginning of this relationship. She saw how her sister was literally losing her head over her fascination with her new acquaintance. Michael turned out to be the eldest of 7 children in his family, 5 years younger than Cindy. Despite the language barrier, the brothers had poor English skills. Cindy felt a strong spiritual connection with Michael, as if they understood each other without words. The next morning, having breakfast with Katie, Cindy couldn't talk about anything else but Michael. She even let slip that he had hinted several times at his willingness to marry her. As soon as Katie heard this, she was extremely skeptical of such a loud statement after their very first meeting. But Cindy reassured her sister, saying that it was simply the best way to distract herself from the painful breakup with her ex-boyfriend Mark and start a new life. Meanwhile, the sister's friend Annette, who was also at the club that evening, met Rudi, Michael's brother. From then on, the two couples began dating together. According to the brothers, they were in the computer business and banking in Germany, and had come to the USA on business. The relationship developed rapidly. Less than a week later, Rudi moved in with Annette, and Michael with Cindy. Katie was shocked by such a lightning-fast development of events in her older sister's life. She believed that Cindy was rushing too much and that these hasty decisions would not lead to anything good. Events continued to unfold at a kaleidoscopic speed. On December 18, when Cindy and Michael were at a friend's wedding, the girls noticed a wedding ring on the bride's finger. It turned out that Cindy and Michael had secretly gotten married on November 28, just 3 weeks after they met. Katie couldn't believe such drastic changes in her older sister's behavior. For the first time, a serious misunderstanding arose between the girls. However, the worst was yet to come. Just a few days later, on December 24, an alarming call came into the Arizona police station. In the desert area of Pinal County, near the Superstition Mountains, random witnesses stumbled upon a mutilated female body. By the description of the clothes, injuries, and the timing of the disappearance, the identity of the deceased was soon established. It turned out to be 30-year-old Cindy Monkman. The autopsy results shocked even experienced experts. The perpetrator had clearly tried not just to kill, but to destroy the victim as a punishment for something. Arizona had not seen such vicious cruelty in a long time. Detectives began an investigation, not ruling out any leads. The circle of suspects narrowed down to 2 men, Cindy's ex-boyfriend Mark, with whom she had unresolved issues, and her current husband Michael, who, as it turned out, was hiding many secrets. The police had to find the truth in this tangled story of love, deceit, and betrayal. The search was complicated by the fact that Mark was in another state, and Michael had a poor understanding of English. However, law enforcement was determined. They intended to establish the identity of the killer by any means and punish him for what he had done. Cindy Monkman's relationship with the charismatic and mysterious Michael Apelt began as a love story and ended in a horrible tragedy. The young woman was desperately seeking new love and found it, but it turned out to be an insidious trap for her. All the details pointed to the involvement of her new German husband and his brother in the crime, but it was very difficult to prove. The police had to conduct a thorough investigation to unravel this tangle of lies, greed, and cynicism that cost the life of a charming young woman from Florida. On the eve of the fateful day, the police carefully studied the last hours of Cindy Monkman's life, trying to reconstruct the chain of events and find clues that would lead them to the killer. Detectives paid special attention to 2 men in the life of the deceased, her ex-boyfriend Mark, with whom Cindy had unresolved issues, and her new German husband Michael Apelt, who had appeared in the girl's life just a couple of months before the tragedy. Katie, Cindy's younger sister, told the investigators that the deceased and Mark were supposed to meet on Christmas. Despite the painful breakup and swift marriage to Michael, Cindy apparently still had feelings for her ex. This meeting could have been the last straw for one of the men. Michael seemed especially suspicious. According to Katie, he called her on the day her sister disappeared, shouting into the phone, demanding to know where Cindy was. The girl could hear that the German was in a state of severe alcohol intoxication. However, due to the language barrier, she was unable to get more information about the last hours Michael had spent with his wife. Katie even asked their mutual friend Annette to visit the newlyweds, but the girl found Michael sound asleep. The police questioned everyone involved, and their testimonies mostly coincided with Katie's words. However, there were also interesting details. A few weeks before Cindy's death, one of Mark's ex-girlfriends was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The investigation was still ongoing at the time, but this information could shed light on possible motives for Cindy's murder. The most unlikely witness to the tragedy could have been Michael Apelt himself. However, it was not possible to talk to him immediately after the body was found due to the language barrier. The only detective in the department who was fluent in German was sent to talk to the widower. Unfortunately, he had little experience in investigating particularly brutal murders. During the interrogation, Michael was surprised that there was someone in the police who spoke his native language. He willingly made contact but behaved very tensely. The German said that on December 23, he and his wife were very busy. In the morning, they took her car to the dealer for maintenance, rented another Subaru, and returned home. Cindy was packing for the trip and was going to meet friends at 10 in the evening. According to Michael, at 7 o'clock he was taking a shower and heard his wife talking emotionally to someone on the phone. Because of the noise of the water, the man could not make out any words or names. After hanging up the phone, Cindy shouted something about some urgent matters and left the house without explaining anything to the agitated Michael. Grabbing her purse and keys, his wife never returned. Michael had to go to the restaurant with his brother and friends alone. Returning home, he hoped to find Cindy, but the house was empty. The interrogation was supplemented by the results of a search of the German's apartment and car, for which he gave voluntary consent. Among the things, a receipt from a restaurant was found, dated the day of Cindy's disappearance. This evidence confirmed Michael's alibi, at least for some time. A strange detail was that the tire tracks of the car in which Cindy was allegedly taken to the desert did not match the tracks of the Subaru rented by the Germans. The police had to track all the movements of the brothers on the fateful day. And then they made a discovery: the rented Subaru had to have its wheels urgently replaced. The reason was torn and worn treads. A strange coincidence, isn't it? Katie, distraught over her sister's death, provided the police with a letter Cindy had sent to her family on the eve of her departure with Michael. The girl passionately described her feelings for the German, plans for the future, and even a desire to introduce him to her family. Reading these lines, knowing about the tragic denouement, was eerie. The investigators managed to reconstruct most of the events of the fateful day. A picture of an ingenious murder committed on the basis of greed and revenge was emerging. It only remained to understand who was behind it: a jealous ex, an insidious foreigner preying on naive women, or both of them. Each of the suspects had enough motives for reprisals against Cindy. It remained to prove who had the cruelty to put this sinister plan into action. During the investigation of the murder of Cindy Monkman, law enforcement officers came across a number of strange and suspicious facts that could shed light on the identity of the perpetrator. The detectives were alerted by a message on the victim's answering machine left by her ex-boyfriend Mark. The call came in at 10 in the morning, and the man claimed to have seen a story about Cindy's disappearance on the morning news. He allegedly worried about his ex-girlfriend and asked to call him back to make sure she was all right. However, the police doubted Mark's sincerity. According to their calculations, at the time of the call, information about Cindy's disappearance could not yet have been aired. It turned out that the man knew about the incident earlier than the journalists reported it. This suggested that Mark was trying to deflect suspicion from himself, as he was in another state. Meanwhile, Michael Apelt, the legal husband of the deceased, did not even realize the scale of the tragedy due to his poor English. When he, along with his brother Rudi and girlfriend Annette, was brought to the police station, Michael took the news of Cindy's death very emotionally. The man cried and shouted, asking how this could have happened. However, the investigators decided not to rely on outward displays of grief and took all three to separate rooms for questioning. Blood, hair, and shoe print samples were taken from each of them to later compare them with those found at the crime scene. At the same time, the detectives carefully checked the alibis of the suspects. In the end, the trio was released due to lack of evidence of involvement in the murder. However, suspicions about Mark did not dissipate. His strange behavior prompted the investigator to go to California to talk to him in person. It turned out that after the tragedy, the man had repeatedly called Cindy's home in Illinois, leaving messages on the answering machine in which he tried to figure out what had happened. On the spot, the detective found out interesting details. Mark was working on the day of the murder, and immediately after his shift, he rented a car and went to Los Angeles to celebrate Christmas with his family. To the surprise of the police officer, the radio host's alibi was confirmed. He physically could not be Cindy's killer, being hundreds of kilometers away from the crime scene. This news came as a real shock, because the investigation was sure that the criminal was someone from the victim's inner circle. The perplexity of law enforcement intensified after the funeral of Cindy on December 31, 1988. During the farewell ceremony, Michael Apelt was supposed to give a speech as the bereaved husband. However, he could not utter a word, emotion seized his throat, and the German just stood and sobbed. His brother Rudi had to forcibly lead Michael away from the podium. But when, after the end of the morning events, people were leaving for their homes, Katie, the sister of the deceased, noticed a strange thing. Passing by the car in which the Apelt brothers and their friend Annette were sitting, the girls saw them laughing. This scene was completely at odds with the image of a grief-stricken widower who had just lost his beloved wife. Katie felt the inappropriateness of the situation and reported her observations to the detectives. Upon receiving this information, the police decided to re-interview the persons involved in the case. Katie was the first to be summoned to the precinct. The girl told in more detail about her sister's whirlwind romance with Michael Apelt and the strange behavior of the German brothers. Now it seemed suspicious to the investigators that the guys avoided talking about work, shared extremely scant information about their past, and tried not to go into the details of their private lives. Katie recalled how a few days after they met, she saw that the brothers were staying at the cheapest motel in town. And this is despite their loud statements about working in the banking sector and staying in the best hotels. The girl could even swear that after the first visit of the Germans to her apartment, cash disappeared, $100. Then she convinced herself that it could not have been them, but now doubts grew stronger with each new detail. The brothers' striking appearance really gave the impression of wealthy and successful young men. But after a while, inconsistencies began to slip into their stories. At first, the guys talked about their work, and then suddenly started complaining about being fired and allegedly blocked accounts. Michael even hinted to Cindy that he would be forced to return to Germany and leave the USA if they did not get married urgently. This also explained the secrecy and haste of their wedding. From the testimony of witnesses, an ominous picture emerged. It seems that Michael openly manipulated Cindy's feelings, forcing her to believe in love and go with him to the altar. The detectives were even able to track down several women with whom the Germans had had affairs before meeting the deceased. Marriage was perceived by the brothers as a profitable deal, and not as a union of two loving hearts. The investigators' suspicions intensified when they found Cindy's personal diary. The last entry in it was dated November 11, just a few weeks before the murder. The woman seemed to be trying to convince herself of the sincerity of her husband's feelings. Between the lines, doubt could be read, but the desire to believe in the best was stronger. Nevertheless, there was still a lack of direct evidence against Michael and his brother. The car rented by the Apelts on the day of the murder, unfortunately, did not provide any clues. The tire prints and traces in the cabin did not match those left by the killer at the crime scene. An unexpected turn in the case occurred on January 3, when Michael Apelt himself contacted the only German-speaking detective in the department. The widower said that after returning to the apartment after the funeral, he listened to a message on the answering machine. One of them was of an openly threatening nature. Michael allegedly could not translate exactly what it was about, so he asked the policeman for help. The next day, Apelt came to the precinct with the recording. It turned out that an unknown man was threatening to kill Michael himself and all his relatives if he did not give up some things. The blackmailer blurted out that it was he who had cut Cindy's throat, but did not specify what exactly he was interested in. Experienced investigators immediately noticed strange reservations and an unnatural tone in the message, as if the person was reading the text. In addition, the phrases sounded clumsy, with mistakes that are not typical for a native English speaker. But when the detectives translated the message into German verbatim, the text immediately became coherent and logical. The suspicion of staging increased sharply, and all eyes again turned to Michael, Rudi and Annette. The investigation into the murder of Cindy Monkman was gaining momentum. The police spared neither time nor effort to solve this terrible crime. Suspicions fell on Michael Apelt, the German husband of the deceased, and his brother Rudi. The detectives resorted to tricks. They deliberately prolonged the interrogations, carefully observing the reactions and behavior of the persons involved. The first breakdown happened to Annette, the brother's friend. The woman held out for a long time, but in the end could not withstand the psychological pressure. In the interrogation room, the detective laid out photographs of Cindy's mutilated body in front of Annette. These eerie shots broke the suspect's resistance, and she began to testify. From her words, it became clear that the Apelt brothers had come to the USA with the aim of making easy money. They were looking for wealthy and trusting women, those who suffered from unhappy love and needed comfort. Annette helped them in these adventures. She corresponded, called the victims, made appointments. After all, Rudi did not speak English at all, and Michael could barely string a few words together. The brothers pretended to be successful businessmen or athletes. Depending on the preferences of the next chosen one, they were either surfboard manufacturers or importers of elite German cars. Usually, the courtship lasted several months. Annette admitted that during this time, about a dozen women passed through the Apelts' beds. The brothers lived with them in cheap motels, shamelessly using their money and feelings. But with Cindy, everything was different. Michael managed to truly capture the girl's heart. After the wedding, the newlyweds settled together, and Cindy took over all the financial worries. She worked several jobs to provide a carefree life for her beloved. And Michael shamelessly spent the money earned by his wife, telling tales about his frozen accounts in German banks. From October to December, Apelt's expenses exceeded $4,000. Realizing that they were dealing with not just a swindler, but a potential killer, the detectives pressed Annette. They threatened to accuse her of complicity in the murder if she continued to remain silent. The frightened woman gave up and told the terrible truth. Annette confessed that with Cindy's appearance, Michael's appetites had grown sharply. He wanted not just to live comfortably at someone else's expense, but to get rich as quickly as possible. Therefore, he came up with a diabolical plan. On November 7, Apelt persuaded his wife to take out a life insurance policy in his name. The amount of insurance was supposed to be $1 million. Michael convinced Cindy that this was a common procedure for married couples in Germany. The woman in love could not refuse, the woman in love could not refuse him. However, the insurance company agreed to insure Cindy's life for only $400,000. This seemed too little to Michael, and he began to push his wife to take more risky steps. As a result, the day before the murder, the total insurance amount was already $800,000. Having received the coveted policy, the Apelt brothers began to plan their luxurious future. They ordered 2 Jaguars worth $144,000 each, 2 Toyota Supras for $66,000 each, and tried on elite Rolex watches. And all this at the cost of the life of a trusting girl. Now it became clear to the police why the Apelts rented a car on the day of the murder. They took Cindy to a deserted desert, pulled her out of the car, and slaughtered her with inhuman cruelty. At the same time, Annette was in the cabin the whole time. She told the terrible details. The brothers dealt with the victim in just 5 minutes, and returned from head to toe covered in blood. Annette helped them change clothes and wash off the bloody traces. After that, they all went to a luxurious restaurant to celebrate the long-awaited victory. The Apelts' cynicism knew no bounds. They were sure that they had committed the perfect murder and that no one would ever know about their crime. Unfortunately for them, Cindy's body was found by random witnesses. Michael had to fiercely play the role of a grieving widower, hiding his joy at getting rich quick. The detectives were tormented by the question, was Cindy the brothers' first victim, or was there a bloody trail behind them? They found the answers to this question in Germany. Colleagues from the Apelts' homeland shared telling details of their past. It turned out that Michael had never had any solid bank accounts or estates. In Germany, he worked odd jobs and was engaged in criminal craft. Rudi had spent several years behind bars for. However, no traces of other murders were found behind the brothers in their homeland. It seems that Cindy became their first and, fortunately, last victim. The investigation was nearing completion, but one fact did not give the detectives peace of mind. Why didn't the tire tracks at the crime scene match the rented car? The answer was surprisingly simple: Michael had foreseen such a development of events. Therefore, he deliberately damaged the treads with sharp maneuvers and skids. When he returned the car to the rental company after the murder, the wheels had to be completely replaced. The service employee confirmed this information. The Apelts understood that tire tracks in the desert were not enough to deflect suspicion from themselves. Therefore, they resorted to another trick. They found a tramp on the streets of Los Angeles who agreed for money to call the police and read out a threatening message. The man verbatim repeated the nonsense that the brothers had written for him. Allegedly, some psycho threatened to kill Michael and his entire family if he did not return the debt to him. The maniac also boasted that it was he who had cut Cindy's throat. But the Apelts did not take into account the professionalism of the detectives. They immediately noticed that the text of the message sounded somehow unnatural, with reservations and grammatical errors. It seemed that English was not the author's native language. To test this guess, the police translated the threats into German verbatim. The text immediately became coherent and logical, which only increased suspicions about the Apelts and their accomplice Annette. The fate of the killers was decided by the court. Physical evidence, expert testimony, and Annette's confession, to whom the police promised immunity in exchange for cooperation, testified against them. During the trial, Michael decided to personally convince the jury of his innocence. He refused the services of lawyers and stated that he himself would prove the groundlessness of the charges against him. This overconfidence played a cruel joke on the killer. He got confused in his own testimony, contradicted himself, and only strengthened the judge's opinion of his guilt. On June 1, 1990, the jury delivered their verdict. Michael and Rudi Apelt were found guilty of first-degree murder. For this terrible crime, they were sentenced to death. In 2009, Rudi's sentence was reviewed. A psychiatric examination showed that he suffered from mental retardation. The death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment with the right to parole. Rudi tried to take advantage of this chance in 2017, but the commission rejected his petition. At the hearing, a letter from Katie, Cindy's sister, was read out. She reminded that it was Rudi who had inflicted most of the fatal wounds on the deceased. According to her, a person capable of such brutality should never be at large. On April 26, 2022, Rudi died in prison at the age of 62. Michael Apelt's sentence remained unchanged. He is still on death row, awaiting execution. The killer's defenders are deliberately delaying this process with numerous appeals. Katie, the sister of the deceased Cindy, is writing a memoir about her life. She admits that the tragic death of her sister destroyed her faith in people, especially men. More than 30 years have passed, but the wound is still bleeding. During this time, Katie never dared to enter into new relationships or marriages. The trauma was too deep, the betrayal too terrible. The story of Cindy Monkman is a warning to all who seek love. The Apelt brothers seduced the girl with dreams of a happy, wealthy life, but instead insidiously took her life. Their actions were dictated not by passion, but by cold calculation. For these arrogant sociopaths, Cindy was just a tool for enrichment, and they shamelessly manipulated her feelings. Unfortunately, the insurance company unwittingly became an accomplice to the killers. By providing Cindy with a huge insurance policy, it essentially signed her death warrant. Today, Michael Apelt continues to count the days behind bars. Ahead is only the inevitable retribution for a terrible crime. He took the life of a charming young woman and destroyed the happiness of her family. Sooner or later, the killer will appear before the Supreme Judge and be held accountable for every drop of blood spilled in the Arizona desert. The fate of Cindy Monkman has become a tragic lesson: do not entrust your love to someone who pays attention only to money. After all, under the mask of an ardent admirer, a cruel and insidious predator can be hiding. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.